Picture a building where 30,000 people wake up every single morning without ever needing to step outside. No sky, no street, no sunlight, if they don't want it. Just floor after floor of a self-contained world stacked 39 stories into the air. This isn't science fiction. This is a real address in China, and what's happening inside it might be a preview of how millions of us end up living within the next 50 years. The building is called Regent International, and it sits in a district called Chunjiang Century City in the city of Hangzhou, about a 2-hour train ride southwest of Shanghai. From the outside, it doesn't look like a monster at first glance. It looks like an ordinary high-rise, maybe a bit longer and more curved than most, painted in soft beige and cream tones that catch the afternoon light. But the moment you understand its shape, the scale of what you're looking at starts to sink in. The building twists in a long S-curve, wrapping across the block like a python resting in the sun. That curve isn't decorative. It's structural, functional, and it's the reason so many apartments inside can catch natural light from at least one direction. Somewhere between 600 and 700 feet tall, with 39 floors stacked one on top of the other. Regent International doesn't just house people, it holds a population larger than most towns you've ever driven through, all under a single roof, all connected by the same hallways, the same elevators, the same beating pulse of daily life. To understand how something like this came to exist, you have to go back to what this building was originally supposed to be. It wasn't designed as an apartment complex at all, it was designed as a luxury hotel, meant to be one of the crown jewels of Hangzhou's rapidly developing skyline. The architect behind it was a woman named Alicia Liu, whose name might not ring a bell immediately, but whose work almost certainly does. She's the same architect who helped design Marina Bay Sands, that iconic hotel in Singapore with the ship-shaped rooftop pool that seems to float above the city. Liu had a reputation for bold, ambitious structures, and Regent International was meant to be another one of those statement pieces. Grand lobbies, sweeping curves, a sense of arrival the moment you walked through the front doors. For a while, that's exactly what it was building toward. But somewhere along the way, the plans changed. The exact reasons are murky and depend on who you ask, but the broad strokes are clear enough. Hangzhou's hotel market wasn't absorbing a project of this size the way developers had hoped, and at the same time, the city was experiencing a massive wave of migration. People were pouring in from smaller towns and rural provinces, chasing jobs, chasing opportunity, chasing the kind of life that only a booming Chinese metropolis could offer. Housing demand was skyrocketing, and somewhere in a boardroom, someone looked at this half-finished luxury hotel and saw a different opportunity entirely. Why not convert it? Why not take all those hotel rooms, already built, already plumbed, already wired, and turn them into small, affordable apartments for the flood of newcomers arriving in the city every single month? That decision is why Regent International feels so strange to walk through today. It's a hybrid. It's a building wearing two different identities at once. The lobby still carries traces of its hotel origins, an ornate, almost theatrical entrance with high ceilings and decorative flourishes that feel completely out of place. Once you remember that thousands of ordinary renters are walking through it every day on their way to work. It's the architectural equivalent of finding a 5-star chandelier hanging above a college dormitory hallway. Grand on top, functional underneath, and slightly disorienting the longer you stare at it. Once you get past the lobby and into the building itself, the scale becomes almost impossible to process. There are somewhere around 12,000 individual units inside Regent International, though because of how densely some of them are subdivided and rented, the actual number of separate living spaces climbs even higher than that. Estimates on the total population vary depending on the source and the time of year, but the range you'll hear most consistently sits between 20,000 and 30,000 residents. At its peak occupancy, the building has reportedly housed the higher end of that range, meaning on any given day, this single structure could contain more people than some entire counties. Who actually lives here? It's not a uniform population by any means. A huge portion of residents are university students, many of them attending schools nearby and looking for housing that's cheap, close, and doesn't require a long-term commitment. Another large portion are recent migrants to Hangzhou, people who've just arrived in the city and need somewhere to land while they figure out their next move, whether that's a new job, a new career, or simply a foothold in a city that's growing faster than its housing supply can keep up with. There are also young professionals just starting out, freelancers, gig workers, small business owners running online shops out of their apartments, and a scattering of social media personalities who found unexpected fame simply by filming their daily lives inside this bizarre vertical world. In a lot of ways, Regent International functions less like a permanent neighborhood and more like a giant way station, a place where people pass through on their way to somewhere else, even if that somewhere else takes years to reach. The apartments themselves are small, and they're priced to match. Studios start at around $200 a month, which, by the standards of a major Chinese city, is remarkably affordable. These starter units are compact, often somewhere around 300 square feet. just enough room for a bed, a small kitchenette, a bathroom, and maybe a fold-out desk if you're lucky. But not every unit in the building is this cramped. Some residents, usually those who've lived there longer or who earn more, combine 2 or 3 adjoining units into a single larger home, sometimes stretching past 700 square feet, with private balconies that look out over the Kentang River winding through the city below. It's a strange kind of stratification, all happening within the same 4 walls of one building. Someone on the 15th floor might be living in a cramped 300 square foot box, while someone 2 floors up has knocked down a wall and built themselves something resembling a real home, complete with a river view most tourists would pay a premium for in a hotel room. And that's really the heart of what makes this building so fascinating and so unsettling to a lot of people who encounter it for the first time. It isn't just an apartment complex. It's designed, deliberately and intentionally, to be a self-contained city. The architect's original vision, even after the shift from hotel to residential use, carried that idea forward. Almost everything a person could need in daily life is somewhere inside this structure. There are full-sized supermarkets on the lower floors, stocked with produce, meat, packaged goods, everything you'd find at a normal grocery store, except you never have to go outside to reach it. There are restaurants scattered throughout, ranging from cheap noodle stalls to sit-down places with actual table service. Internet cafes are tucked into corners of the building, popular with the university students who make up such a large share of the population. There are gyms with weight rooms and cardio equipment. There are swimming pools where residents can do laps without ever seeing daylight if they choose their hours right. There are beauty salons offering haircuts, manicures, the whole range of personal grooming services you'd normally have to run errands across town to find. There's a daycare center for the handful of families with young children who call this place home. There's even a school integrated into the lower levels, and reports describe a small clinic or hospital facility as well, meaning residents can handle basic medical needs without leaving the building's footprint. And then there's the detail that tends to make people's jaws drop the most. There's a subway stop built directly beneath the building, not nearby, not a short walk away, underneath it, which means that, in theory, a resident of Regent International could wake up, get dressed, ride an elevator down to street level, walk directly into a subway station without ever technically stepping outside, ride the train to wherever their job is located in Hangzhou, and then reverse that entire journey on the way home. Depending on how their workplace is set up, it's genuinely possible for someone to go days, or even weeks, without breathing outdoor air or feeling direct sunlight on their skin. That's not a metaphor. That's the literal physical reality this building was engineered to make possible. Try to imagine what a single day actually looks like for someone living here. You wake up in a room, barely large enough to stretch your arms out fully in both directions. The wall might be thin enough that you can hear your neighbor's alarm through the drywall or the faint murmur of a television a few doors down. You get dressed, and instead of stepping out onto a street, you step into a long, fluorescent-lit hallway stretching farther than you can comfortably see, doors lining both sides like something out of an enormous ship. You take an elevator down, and depending on which one you catch and how many floors it stops on, that ride alone might take several minutes, packed in with other residents doing the exact same commute, except their destination might be 3 floors down to the gym, or 15 floors down to the supermarket, or all the way to the ground floor to catch that subway. Downstairs, the building hums with the kind of low-level chaos you'd expect from a small town, except compressed into hallways and walkways instead of open streets. Vendors call out from tiny shops. The smell of fried food drifts from a noodle stall near the internet cafe. A line has formed outside one of the salons because a particular stylist is popular this week. Kids from the daycare are being walked toward whatever activity is scheduled for that hour. Somewhere, a group of students are sprawled across chairs near the internet cafe, headphones on, immersed in whatever game has their attention that afternoon. If you needed groceries, a haircut, the gym, and dinner, you could realistically do all 4 without ever putting on shoes meant for outdoor walking, without checking the weather, without the sky factoring into your day at all. For some residents, this isn't a compromise. It's genuinely the appeal. When you talk to people who've chosen to live here or read through the accounts that have surfaced through interviews and social media posts, a certain kind of practicality keeps coming up again and again. The convenience is real. Not having to commute across a sprawling, traffic-choked city just to buy groceries or get to the gym saves an enormous amount of time. And in a city like Hangzhou, where commutes can eat up hours of a person's day, that's not a small thing. Rent is affordable relative to almost anywhere else nearby. Security tends to be tight, since the building operates almost like a controlled campus, with entry points, surveillance, and a level of order that residents describe as reassuring rather than oppressive. Cleaning crews maintain common areas. Garbage is funneled into centralized collection points rather than left to pile up in hallways. Noise complaints are taken seriously enough that the building enforces strict quiet hours, an important detail in a place where thousands of people are living in extremely close proximity to one another. But convenience only tells half the story, and the other half is a lot more complicated. Because for every resident who describes Regent International as efficient, secure, and surprisingly livable, there's another voice, often from outside the building looking in, describing it as something closer to a nightmare. The word that gets attached to this place more than any other, on across news articles, social media captions, and video essays, is dystopian. And it's not hard to see why. There's something deeply unsettling about a structure engineered to make outdoor life unnecessary. Human beings evolved needing sunlight, open space, unstructured movement through a world that isn't measured in floor numbers and elevator wait times. A building that strips all of that away, even in the name of efficiency, even in the name of solving a genuine housing crisis, starts to feel less like an apartment complex and more like an experiment in how far people can be compressed before something breaks. Mental health concerns come up constantly in discussions about this place, and they're not unfounded. Living inside a fully self-contained environment, one where you rarely need to interact with the outside world, can quietly erode a person's sense of connection to anything beyond their own routine. Psychologists who study urban density have long pointed out that access to natural light, open sky, and unstructured outdoor space isn't a luxury. It's a basic ingredient in stable mental health. Strip that away, replace it with fluorescent hallways and recycled air, and you start creating conditions that quietly wear a person down over months and years, even if no single day feels dramatic enough to notice. There's also the simple physical reality of the units themselves. 300 square feet is not a lot of space for a human being to spend most of their life inside, and claustrophobia isn't an exaggerated concern. It's a documented reaction plenty of residents describe when they first realize just how little room they have to move around in. Then there's the social dimension, which might be the most quietly uncomfortable part of the entire building. Because Regent International isn't one uniform community. It's stratified, floor by floor, almost like a vertical class system compressed into a single structure. Rent prices shift depending on which floor you're on, how close you are to certain amenities, whether your unit has a river-facing balcony or looks out onto another wing of the building instead. Or access to certain facilities can depend on which section of the building you live in, meaning two residents living just a few floors apart might have completely different experiences of what living in Regent International actually means. One might have a river view, a combined double unit, and easy access to the nicer gym. Another might be crammed into a windowless 300 square foot box near the loudest hallway in the building, paying almost the same rent for a completely different quality of life. It's a microcosm of exactly the kind of economic stratification you'd find across an entire city. Except instead of being spread across different neighborhoods, it's stacked vertically, floor by floor, inside one continuous structure. None of this has stopped Regent International from becoming something of a viral sensation, especially over the past couple of years. Drone footage capturing that long S-curve stretching across the block has circulated widely across TikTok and Reddit, paired with captions calling it everything from an architectural marvel to a real-life hive city straight out of a science fiction film. Comparisons to Warhammer's imagined megastructures come up constantly in the comment sections, half joking, half genuinely uneasy. A handful of creators living inside the building have started documenting their daily routines, giving outsiders rare glimpses past the lobby into the actual hallways and tiny apartments that make up daily life here. Interestingly, for a building housing tens of thousands, footage from inside remains relatively rare, adding an extra layer of mystery to a place already strange enough on its own. To really understand why a building like this exists at all, you have to zoom out and look at the broader pressures shaping Chinese urban development over the past few decades. China has experienced one of the fastest, largest scale waves of urbanization in human history. Hundreds of millions of people have moved from rural areas into cities over a remarkably short span of time, chasing jobs, education, and opportunities that simply don't exist back home. Cities like Hangzhou, which has transformed itself into a major tech and commerce hub, home to companies like Alibaba, have absorbed enormous waves of newcomers, and housing supply has struggled to keep pace with that demand. Land within city centers is limited and extraordinarily expensive, which pushes developers toward one obvious solution: build up instead of out. Maximize every square foot of available land by stacking as many residential units and as many supporting amenities vertically into a single structure as possible. Regent International isn't really an outlier in this context. It's an extreme, highly visible example of a trend that's playing out across Chinese cities in less dramatic forms constantly. Mixed-use developments that combine housing, retail, and transit access into single integrated complexes have become increasingly common, essentially compressing what used to be entire neighborhoods into single buildings or connected building clusters. It's efficient, it's profitable for developers, And for a huge portion of the population dealing with China's housing affordability crisis, it's genuinely appealing, offering a foothold in a major city at a price point that traditional standalone apartments simply can't match. It's worth pausing here to draw a contrast with a very different kind of Chinese building story because it puts Regent International's situation into sharper focus. China is also home to dozens of so-called ghost cities, entire districts, and sometimes entire cities built in anticipation of population growth that never actually arrived. Ordos Kangbashi, out in Inner Mongolia, is probably the most famous example. A city constructed with the capacity to house roughly 1 million people, complete with government buildings, museums, wide empty boulevards, and rows of apartment towers, almost all of it standing eerily vacant for years after construction finished. It's the mirror opposite of what's happening at Regent International. One is a building desperately overflowing with more residents than it was ever originally designed for. The other is an entire city built for a population that speculative real estate development assumed would show up, and largely didn't. Together, these two extremes say something important about the unpredictability of urban planning at this scale, how difficult it is to correctly forecast where millions of people will actually choose to live, work, and build their lives, even when you're pouring billions of dollars into infrastructure meant to house them. Regent International also isn't entirely alone even within its own specific category of overcrowded vertical living. Hong Kong has its own famous example, a structure known as the Yik Chong Building, often nicknamed the Monster Building because of its sheer, imposing scale. It houses somewhere around 10,000 residents, considerably fewer than Regent International, but built on the same basic principle: take an enormous number of small residential units, stack them densely into a single connected structure, and let sheer density do the work that individual houses and low-rise apartments simply can't achieve on limited urban land. The Monster Building has become its own kind of internet-famous location, its narrow interior courtyards and towering walls of windows photographed endlessly by tourists and urban explorers, feeding into the same broader fascination with hyper-dense, self-contained living that Regent International taps into. And this fascination isn't confined to China or Hong Kong either. Cities around the world are grappling with remarkably similar pressures: rising populations, shrinking available land, and housing costs that continue climbing well beyond what average incomes can comfortably absorb. In response, developers from Tokyo to Singapore to parts of the United States have started experimenting with their own versions of mixed-use, self-contained residential complexes, buildings that fold grocery stores, gyms, co-working spaces, and transit access directly into the base of a residential tower, reducing how far residents ever need to travel for their daily needs. None of these projects have reached quite the same scale or density as Regent International, but the underlying philosophy is unmistakably similar. Why build a neighborhood spread out across many acres of increasingly expensive land when you can stack that same neighborhood vertically into a single, tightly integrated structure instead? Whether that philosophy represents genuine progress or troubling compromise depends enormously on who you ask. And honestly, it probably depends on which floor of Regent International they happen to be standing on when you ask them. Because that might be the most important thing this building reveals. Once you strip away the viral drone footage and the dystopian captions and the shock value of a 30,000 person population figure, it reveals that the future of housing, at least for an enormous portion of the world's growing urban population, might not look like sprawling suburbs or charming low-rise neighborhoods at all. It might look a lot more like this: dense, vertical, efficient almost to the point of discomfort. A place where nearly everything you need exists within walking distance, except that walk happens entirely indoors, through hallways instead of streets, elevators instead of sidewalks, artificial light instead of open sky. Some residents will tell you that's a fair trade. That affordability, security, and convenience are worth giving up a certain amount of open space and outdoor time, especially when you're young, just starting out, and focused on building a career or finishing a degree rather than settling down permanently. Others will tell you it's a warning sign, a glimpse of what happens when housing pressure and land scarcity push urban design toward maximum density without fully accounting for what human beings actually need to feel psychologically and physically healthy over the long term. Both of those perspectives are probably true at the same time, which is exactly what makes a place like Regent International so difficult to simply categorize as good or bad, brilliant or dystopian, inspiring or unsettling. What's clear is that this building isn't some strange one-time anomaly that popped up by accident. It's a genuine, functioning response to real pressures that aren't going away anytime soon. Land in major cities keeps getting more expensive. Populations keep concentrating in urban centers rather than spreading out into rural areas, and developers, faced with those two unavoidable realities, keep looking for ways to squeeze more usable living space out of smaller and smaller footprints. Regent International might be one of the most extreme examples of that trend currently standing anywhere on Earth, but it's very unlikely to be the last one built. As more cities around the world confront the exact same math, limited land, growing populations, rising costs, more of them are going to end up looking at projects like this one, not as cautionary tales to avoid, but as blueprints worth studying, and in some cases, worth replicating. So the next time you see a video of Regent International drifting across your feed, that long S-shaped building curling across a city block in Hangzhou, drone footage capturing just how enormous it really is from above, it's worth remembering that you're not just looking at an oddity built for internet shock value. You're looking at one possible answer to a question more and more cities are going to have to answer eventually. How do you house tens of thousands of people, affordably, efficiently, and sustainably, when the land beneath your feet simply isn't expanding to match the number of people who need somewhere to live? Whether that answer feels like a glimpse of a smarter, more efficient future, or a warning about how far convenience can push us away from the basic human need for open sky and unstructured space, might genuinely depend on which door in that 39-story building you happen to walk through first. There's another angle to all of this that rarely gets mentioned in the viral clips and the drone footage, and it has to do with how a building like this actually gets managed day to day, because keeping a structure like Regent International functioning smoothly is its own quiet feat of logistics. Somewhere behind the scenes, there's a property management operation handling everything a small municipal government would normally be responsible for. Waste collection has to be coordinated across dozens of floors, funneling garbage through chutes into centralized collection points, rather than letting it pile up in hallways. Water pressure and electrical load have to be carefully balanced across thousands of units drawing power at roughly the same times every morning and evening. Elevator systems, arguably the building's most critical piece of infrastructure, have to be maintained constantly because, with a population this size, even a short outage on one bank can mean hundreds of residents facing a slow, crowded scramble toward whichever elevators are still running. Security personnel monitor entry points around the clock, because housing tens of thousands of strangers in close proximity requires oversight a normal residential block never has to think about. Fire safety alone is a monumental undertaking in a structure like this. Imagine designing an evacuation plan for 30,000 people, spread across 39 floors, each one packed with long hallways and small subdivided units, some informally combined by tenants over the years. Building managers have had to think carefully about stairwell capacity, emergency lighting, and clear signage in a structure never originally engineered for this density, since it started life as a hotel, not permanent housing for tens of thousands. That mismatch between original intent and current use is part of what makes architects and planners uneasy studying Regent International closely. It works day to day, remarkably well by most accounts, but because of constant, careful management, not because it was purpose-built for a population this large. There's also an economic story tucked inside all of this that's easy to overlook amid the shock value of the population numbers. For Hangzhou itself, buildings like Regent International serve a genuinely useful function within the broader housing market. They absorb newcomers who would otherwise be competing for scarce, expensive housing elsewhere, people who might not have the savings or credit history required for a traditional lease. In that sense, the building acts almost like a pressure release valve for the housing market, soaking up demand from students, migrant workers, and young professionals who need an affordable foothold. Remove a building like this from the equation, and that same population doesn't simply disappear. It gets pushed into other corners of the market, driving up prices in neighborhoods never designed to absorb that kind of demand. Seen through that lens, Regent International isn't just a curiosity. It's functioning, whether by careful design or fortunate accident, as a genuine piece of Hangzhou's housing infrastructure, strange as it looks from the outside, but serving a real need for people who might otherwise struggle to find anywhere to live at all.